Underworld sees the Doctor and Leela arrive at the end of the cosmos, where they encounter a group of people whose trajectory throughout the past 1,000 years or so has actually been influenced by the Doctor's people, the Time Lords. It's genuinely quite an interesting starting place for the story, seeing the Doctor encounter and interact with people whose lives are different because of decisions that were made a substantial amount of time ago. Unfortunately, despite having what I think is a pretty neat setup, this serial does nothing with it and just has our main characters run around for about 90 minutes, and that's this whole story. Underworld is one of those infamous classic Doctor Who stories that is known within the Doctor Who community as one of the bad ones, and having seen it, I completely understand why.
Whatever blows can be sucked.
Now, having said that and acknowledging that yes, this story is bad, one thing I do find worth mentioning is that if this serial had just not used any blue screen or used it very sparingly, I doubt it would get as much hate as it does, because this story has a number of faults that really do hold it back, but it isn't truly awful. It doesn't do anything horrible with our main characters, though they are consistently lacking in here, and the story also doesn't do anything atrocious in terms of its narrative. The serial is bad, yes, but awful? I wouldn't go that far. To me, the worst thing you could do would be to have a truly horrendous characterization of the Doctor. If you were to make him really cowardly and mean without any meaningful purpose, like if he attempted to murder his companion or something along those lines, now, I would find that to be a truly poor depiction of the character. But here, the most that I can say in complaint of him and Leela is that they really don't do much of anything to save the story. They're in it, they have good moments, though they are incredibly rare this time, and mostly they just aren't very engaging as protagonists. Sometimes the main characters can make what would otherwise be a weak episode enjoyable, but here they just don't. They exist within the serial, but don't contribute much to improve its quality. And since we're on the characters, as someone who does like K9, he was fine in here.
100 meters. Penetration, you have penetration.
He certainly didn't take away from this one, but like the main two, he doesn't add a lot. I do like having him around though, but man, do the scenes of him traveling through the caves look not great. And this brings me back to the blue screen. I honestly think this might be a key reason as to why people cite this one as such a bad story, because my god, it looks bad. And the reasons for this are plentiful and mostly obvious, but absolutely worth going over. It all really revolves around the biggest issue, which is that they choose to use blue screen as the main background for the story. At a guess, probably close to 50% of this one is using a significant amount of it in frame, and it does not look good. Doctor Who has had plenty of poor blue screen, but it is typically used sparingly. Sure, the use of blue screen in Terror of the Autons isn't great, but it's not the entire background of the story, it's one element of it. And I think that even if the blue screened element is the focus of the shot, that's fine so long as that is the intent. You are looking at the creepy dummy in these scenes from the Pertwee story, but when you use it in place of an actual set, all of a sudden it's in a huge portion of the shots, and there's a bunch of different things that just aren't working together. I mean, the first time we see the cavern is in this shot. Now, we all know this looks like hot garbage, but the question is why? I mean, obviously the technology they were using wasn't as refined as it is today, so there's just all sorts of things that aren't going to look as good as if they were made in 2021, which is not to say that everything made nowadays looks good, that's obviously not the case. But the two most noteworthy issues here are with the lighting and the movements of the characters in the foreground relative to the background. Not only does it not look like these people are in a cavern, but it doesn't look like they are in this one. And I mean, what even is this? You have a bunch of people running in front of the camera, their feet definitely aren't running on the cave floor, and their movements and the size of the cavern just don't match with their speed, which just leaves a shot that looks in many ways wrong. And there are numerous points throughout the story with strange foot positions and running, and it all looks really wonky and just plain bad, especially K9. But you also get moments where props are mixed in with the blue screen, usually to a poor result. There's plenty of examples of them using the same cavern multiple times, but they won't keep track of which ones are where, and you'll just end up seeing a character run out of an area, but running down the painting, he just came the same way across to get to the place he's running out of. It's tiresome. There's also where you have characters walking through a cave and then they just walk over the painting of the cavern instead of out of it. I'm sure this would have been a lot harder to fix in the 70s, but I can just export the frame from the video editor, crop out the edge of the exit, overlay that above the original clip, and boom, it's kind of fixed. Okay, so this is particularly amusing to me right here. Now, I said I was going to try to fix this problem here by cropping the frame, and I did, but what you can see happens is that as they actually go from the right to the left, you can see the point where the frame cropping hits up here, so you can actually see the point at which the head disappears behind that area, which actually doesn't make any sense. What I thought would fix the frame didn't do anything because I didn't anticipate the fact that they're actually just not getting smaller enough to appear as if they're walking out the other side. What's happening is that they're just walking off of the frame, which means that they're not getting small enough. If they were getting smaller by the end of the frame, it would appear as though they were walking off of the frame because they wouldn't have their heads meeting the top of the cavern. So by cropping the cavern on top of their heads, it just amplifies the problem, and you can see right here, oh, this guy's head just disappears into the cavern. It makes literally no sense because the shot makes literally no sense. Also, there's this. I think the points at which these effects work the best are when they are used sparingly, and in shots that are quite dimly lit like this one. It doesn't look good, but it's better than most of the serial. And I'm sure I could talk for this whole review about the failings of the blue screen in this story, but I've had my fun, and it's not as though anyone is contesting the idea that it is bad, so I think we can move on now. You know, the supporting cast really doesn't do this serial any favors. I mean, it's not as bad as some stories where you have characters that are genuinely annoying on a regular basis, but none of them are memorable whatsoever. I genuinely cannot remember a single character's name, and the lack of interest with the supporting cast also contributes to the same interest not existing in the actual story, because I really don't care about the conflict here. It's not engaging remotely, and if I actually cared about any of these people, or if our main characters played a more active role, then maybe I would have. But I'm still not too hopeful on that front because the actual story itself is seemingly non-existent. Now, make no mistake, it does exist, but personally, I had a great deal of trouble remembering the ins and outs of it. Effectively, there's a group of people, they arrive on a planet, they find some slaves, some guards, some robots, they run around for an hour or so in search of a race bank, and that's about it. I wasn't joking when I said they just ran about for a good deal of this story. There are some obstacles, but that's what the serial is at its core. People running around, hiding a bit, running around some more, and eventually it ends. It would be one thing if there was maybe some sort of interesting or engaging foe for the Doctor to deal with, but the show fails in this regard, and all we get are the aforementioned guards and robots, as well as a computer and... yeah, this one just doesn't have much to offer. One of the things I will add about Underworld, which contributes to it not being as bad as the worst Doctor Who stories, is that this story isn't as exhausting to watch or listen to as the likes of The Web Planet and The Space Pirates. Had this one been 2.5 hours, then odds are it would have drained me a lot more, but at only about 90 minutes, it wasn't too bad to sit through. It also helps that the individual parts seemed to be a bit shorter than normal, at around 22 minutes on average as opposed to the usual 25. It's not a significant difference, but just that little bit did help in me actually making it through this story without feeling exhausted like I did with some other ones. So effectively, Underworld isn't as bad because it isn't as long, which means it isn't as draining, and thus it's less difficult to get through despite still being a bad serial. Up to this point, the only thing I've actually really defended about Underworld is the starting premise, and in terms of other things I liked about it, of which there was very little, one of the things that comes to mind is the end of part 1. Here we see the ship our main characters have landed on being used as sort of the starting point for the formation of some kind of planet. I can't speak to how realistic this is. In truth, I don't care that much, but I thought it was kind of a neat idea, even if it didn't amount to all that much. Overall, I found this to be a genuinely bad serial. It's certainly not horrendous, but in nearly every regard that a story can fail, this one does. From its poor use of blue screens, the lackluster foes and side characters, the unengaging story, all the way to our main character's unmemorable presence. It's just a whole lot of nothing. It's just such a nothing story with a number of things that add up to making it quite a bad one on the whole. Mercifully, this was a slightly shorter one than most of Tom Baker's, but it was still more than I needed from this uninspired mess. This was absolutely a bad story, and I am going to give Underworld a rating of 5 out of 10. And that does it for now, everybody. If you have any thoughts on this one, then feel free to share them down below. I do hope to see you around soon on an upcoming Sunday for a review of The Invasion of Time, and if not, that is absolutely fine, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.